Hollow Knight is well known for its awesome boss design, but that doesn't mean some bosses don't completely miss the mark. Usually, people are very cautious about giving their opinions on game design because, as the tired line goes, it's all just subjective. Well, I think that's shallow engagement disguised as wisdom, so rather than waffle like the rest of you indecisive bastards, here's a decently comprehensive theory of what I think makes a boss poorly designed. I'm Holland, and these are the 4 evil horsemen of Hollow Knight boss design. Alright, so I call this the evil theory of boss design. It might even be applicable across games, but of course we'll be looking at it through the lens of Hollow Knight. Every boss is evaluated on the 4 pillars of evil design, producing a final percentage depicting the evil score of that boss. A low score on any of these scales is preferable to a high score. Here are the scales of evil. Erratic Outcomes, the extent to which luck dictates the difficulty or length of the fight. Vague Mechanics, how intuitive the boss is. Inactive Gameplay, for how much of the fight you are unable to attack the boss. And Lacklustre Telegraphing, the number of circumstances where it is impossible for you to dodge an attack. Every score is based on how an experienced player would handle the fight, except for Vague Mechanics, which needs to be looked at from the perspective of a first-timer. Now, what do these scales actually entail? First, Erratic Outcomes. The boss which I think most exemplifies this aspect of evil design is No Eyes. This is her evil card. At the bottom you can see every aspect of evil design rated from 0 to 3. At the top, the accumulated evil score for this boss. 7 out of 12, that's roughly 58%, a decently high score by Hollow Knight standards. And remember, a high score is bad. No Eyes is generally not a super well-liked boss, but I think that primarily comes down to the level of RNG involved in her fight. Not only does she teleport randomly around the arena, she also has a random chance to teleport each time she's hit. So you can get lucky with teleport locations and frequency and the fight goes by quickly. Or you can get unlucky, in which case it becomes a dragged out game of hide and seek. And that's why she scores maximum points on Erratic Outcomes. She does great on vagueness, primarily because she's so simple. There's no question on how to avoid these flying spirit things once you get a sense of how they travel upwards and downwards. Not so good on inactivity though. There's a lot of waiting for open patterns, and the projectiles aren't fun enough to dodge to be considered active gameplay. On Lacklustre Telegraphing, we have what I call a blunder case. You might say that No Eyes has great telegraphing, since you can almost always see the spirit bolts coming at you. However, the problem comes not from that, but from an edge case. And that's when you're about to pogo No Eyes as she teleports away, leading to you getting damaged. It's a semi-rare occurrence, but it nonetheless brings her from 0 to 1 on this facet. We'll see more of these blunder cases later on. The second aspect of evil design are vague mechanics. All in all, I think Hollow Knight bosses are quite good about intuitively showing you how to respond to their attacks. And so the only boss I could give a full score on this aspect is the final boss of the third Pantheon. So if you really don't want to have that boss spoiled for you, you can skip to the next section. All good? Alright, here it comes. It's our beloved Sly, a great boss, but in my estimation, the hardest one to understand how to react to. I'll link to a deep dive into my thoughts on Sly down below, but here's the short and the long of why I think he's so unintuitive. His basic triple swipe attack has a bunch of quirks that take time to properly figure out. First, you should almost never run away from Sly, but wait until he's on his third strike and then go under him. Going towards such an erratic boss isn't very intuitive. Second, he'll sometimes perform a similar attack but without the third strike, making it hard to understand when he's safe to approach. And third, Sly will change directions after the second but not the third slash. Again, that's totally fine gameplay-wise, but it's hard to grasp the logic of. There's more to it, but let's not get caught up in the details. Basically, while I love Sly, I think he is super unintuitive when you first meet him. For the other traits, he gets a blunder on his erratic outcomes, since in rare instances he can perform a dash slash disguised as a great slash. You actually can't really hit Sly all that often, yet he doesn't score highly on inactive gameplay since all of his attacks are really fun to dodge. And finally, if you're too close to Sly while he performs his most common attack, you cannot escape in time. This can easily be alleviated by staying away from him, but that doesn't count against the inherent unfairness of some of his attacks. 58%, surprisingly on the same level as No Eyes. If that annoys you, don't worry, I'll talk about it later. Next up is inactive gameplay. Most bosses have some downtime, but a few outshine the rest, mainly those that straight up teleport outside of the arena for periods of time, making them invulnerable to damage. Probably the most infamous example is Elder Hugh. What a radical fellow, he scores perfectly on half the traits and terribly on the other half. There isn't much to say about Hugh in terms of inactivity. He can teleport outside of the arena for one of his 2 attacks, making you have to wait for him to return before the fight can continue. How often he teleports is also seemingly dictated by luck, granting him a maximum score in erratic outcomes as well. However, his attacks are simple to dodge, and it's clear how to do so. Some of you might not think inactive gameplay is actually a real issue, because after all, it gives you time to heal and catch your breath. But ask yourself this, why does the boss have to leave the arena for you to do that? You could just make him not attack you for a few seconds while still being vulnerable to attacks himself. This is what stackers already do. Finally, we have Lacklustre Telegraphing. If you've ever heard me talk about the repositioning problem, you'll know how much I dislike bosses that don't sufficiently telegraph their attacks. One of these is Grey Prince Sot. Not only does he lack proper telegraphing when he's about to jump, he also fails to indicate when he's about to finish the flail attack. Failing to indicate when a movement-based attack is going to stop is the same as failing to indicate when one is going to start. The Grey Prince does terribly overall and is one of the most evil bosses in Hollow Knight at 75%. Luck plays a huge part in the fight in regard to attack patterns, minion spawns, and the duration of the flail attack. His mechanics are vague in the sense of it not being clear how best to respond to most of his attacks. And finally, he has pretty active gameplay, although there's a blunder case in which he jumps outside of the arena, leaving you to await his return. I don't care if you for some strange reason actually enjoy fighting this boss. When evaluated on these terms, he does not do well. Okay, fine Holland, but can you really say that an evil boss is a bad boss? Isn't that just subjective? Well, I suppose it depends on what you mean when you say bad. I won't spend too much time on this here because it deserves a video of its own. But if we define bad as possessing traits that make for a generally less fun and more frustrating experience, I think we can say that scoring higher on the evil traits makes a boss worse, given that we want bosses to be fun and non-frustrating. When you say that it's just subjective, which people love to do on these issues, I think you're engaging with the subject matter on a very shallow level. Because in a sense, you are right if subjective just means something like people can differ in their interpretations. Or even on a deeper level, if there truly are no design decisions that people tend to enjoy more than others, you might also be right. However, I think that's an absurd claim. Anyway, let's move on. I'll probably make a video on this topic in the future because it clearly bothers me, so make sure to subscribe if you'd be interested in that conversation. While I think the evil theory of boss design does pretty well at capturing the essence of a poorly designed boss fight, I also think it needs further development. And that's because it does have a few flaws. First of all, it does not capture difficulty, but I also don't think it should. It makes sense to have easier bosses like Grossmother and Massive Moss Charger when the player isn't very familiar with the controls. That doesn't make Massive Moss Charger an evil boss. But you do have to keep in mind, when comparing bosses in terms of their evil score, that a more difficult boss is more likely to be evil. Look at Massive Moss Charger's evil card. That can't be right, 17%! That's as low as I'd put a boss like Mantis Lords. Well, but it's true though, Moss Charger isn't a frustrating boss, it's just extremely simplistic. And that makes it a lot easier to make him fair, i.e. not evil. Where this gets really misleading is when we compare a boss like No Eyes to Sly. They have the same evil score, but I think it's hard to deny that Sly has a better design. The point here is that Sly is way more complex than No Eyes, and so becomes harder to keep fair and balanced, which is something the evil score doesn't account for. But again, if the scale is used correctly, this is all working more or less as intended. As long as you keep in mind that more complex bosses require more effort to keep fair and balanced. If we take a look at those cards again, there's another flaw with the system, and that's the fact that each facet of evil is weighted equally. That means a 3 out of 3 score on vague mechanics is just as bad as a 3 out of 3 score on Lacklustre Telegraphing, and in reality, I just don't think that's accurate. I would rather have a vague boss with good telegraphing than the reverse. I wanted to keep the scoring system simple, but to do so I had to sacrifice this nuance, and that is a pretty big sacrifice. Were I to rate each scale in terms of significance, I would put vague mechanics at the bottom, since that's only a problem for the short time it takes to learn the fight. I'm not sure exactly where I'd put the rest, I just don't think being unintuitive makes you as evil as, say, requiring a huge amount of luck. Which is one other reason why Sly is probably a less evil boss than No Eyes. And finally, it's really hard to accurately evaluate a boss from 0 to 3. Partly, that's again to do with the simplicity of the rating system, which might have been better served going from 0 to 10, 25 or even 100. But I don't think it's as simple as that. To give one score representing the degree to which luck has an influence on a fight is tough, because there are a lot of factors to consider. And that's also why I'm not claiming that my scores on each boss are completely accurate. And yet you can approximate each facet. For example, I think most people would agree that No Eyes involves a lot of luck, and that Elder Q has significant downtime. All that said, I'm pretty content with the outline of this theory. I think I managed to capture the 4 most fundamental assets of poor boss design. I'm sure a lot of you will have dissenting opinions to share in the comments, so please go right ahead, pour your heart out. I'd love to hear what you think about this theory. And even if you think I'm completely wrong about everything I've said in this video, isn't it fun to debate these topics? If you think so, I'd urge you to subscribe to the channel. Yes, that includes you, Dissenter. That way we can continue to have important conversations on topics like what makes for a good boss, and does that question even make sense? Alright, well, I've been Holland. Thank you for getting this far, and I hope to see you in the comments below. If you want to see me rate every boss in terms of their evil score, let me know and I'll definitely consider it. Otherwise, have a wonderful day.